uncovered a massive Japanese submarine sunk off Hawaii. It could have rewritten the history of World War II.
For 80 years, a secret near Hiroshima was buried, not by rubble, but by classified files. In 2025, those files were opened. They pointed divers to a sealed underwater cave. What they found inside rewrites a terrifying part of World War II. This isn't about the 1945 event, not directly. It's about what was hidden before it happened, a doomsday project that Japan and the US agreed to bury. The discovery inside this cavern isn't just a submarine, it's a time capsule of a conflict that almost went in a much darker direction. A ghost in the dock. For 80 years, the waters around the Kure Naval District just a few miles south of Hiroshima have held many secrets. But most people assume those secrets were all just rusting metal from the final days of the conflict. It turns out the biggest secret of all was hidden in plain sight and completely untouched. So here's the deal. In early 2025, the Japanese government, in coordination with the U.S. Department of Defense, released a batch of previously classified post-conflict documents. Most of it was boring paperwork, supply manifests, occupation force rotations, things like that. But buried in the appendix of one file labeled Operation Omi was a nautical chart from 1946. This chart showed a small rocky island near Kure with a section of the coastline marked Entry Denied Permanent U.S. 7th Fleet Order. What most people don't realize is that Kure was the absolute heart of the Imperial Japanese Navy. It was one of the 4 main naval arsenals. This was the shipyard that built the Yamato, the largest battleship ever made. Kure was a fortress, and the islands around it were riddled with tunnels, gun emplacements, and hidden facilities. This declassified chart got the attention of a private maritime archaeology group based in Osaka, the OMAG, or Osaka Maritime Archaeology Group. Now, a lot of people are already wondering if this group is really private. They seem to have unlimited funding and the most advanced deep-sea equipment on the planet. But on paper, they're a civilian research outfit. They used the new declassification as a legal green light and sent their main research vessel, the Haken, to the coordinates. At first, they found nothing. The coastal cliffs of the small island were sheer, dropping straight into the water. There was no visible entrance, no sign of anything. But here's the catch. They weren't looking on the surface. They were looking under the water. They deployed a multi-beam sonar array and started scanning the underwater cliff face, about 60 feet below the surface. That's when they found it. A perfect, clean rectangle about 50 feet wide and 30 feet high in the middle of the natural rock. It was a seal. It looked like solid rock, but the sonar showed it was a different, denser material. And get this, it was almost 8 feet thick. This was not a natural cave. This was a door. The OMAG team had to bring in specialized deep-sea drilling and cutting equipment. The operation took 3 full days. They had to cut a small, man-sized hole in the corner of the massive seal. They were worried that breaching the whole thing might cause a catastrophic collapse. On the 3rd day, they broke through. A cloud of black, stagnant water and silt billowed out of the hole, a pocket of dead water that hadn't moved in decades. After letting it settle for hours, the team sent in their most advanced ROV, a small underwater robot named Kensei, equipped with high-powered lights and cameras. The footage, which was just released, is chilling. The ROV squeezed through the small hole into total absolute blackness. The water inside was perfectly still. The first thing the lights hit was not rock, but concrete, a smooth concrete wall. The ROV turned 90 degrees and followed the wall. And then, the cavern opened up. The sonar on the ROV lit up the darkness, revealing an unbelievable sight. This was not a cave. This was a massive man-made submarine pen. A hidden bunker carved deep into the island, big enough to hold a battleship. The ceiling was 100 feet above the water level. There were concrete walkways, mooring stations, and even cranes, all covered in a thick layer of 80-year-old grime. And in the center of the pen, floating in the dark water, was a submarine. It was massive. The ROV's lights could only see a tiny fraction of it at a time. A huge black hull just sitting there, waiting. It was in near-perfect condition, preserved by the cold, oxygen-poor water. The archaeologists on the Haken were stunned. They knew Japanese naval history. This wasn't a normal sub. It was too big. Way too big. The ROV traveled the length of the hull. 400 feet. 500. No, that was wrong. The sub was over 400 feet long. That is longer than a football field. In fact, it's longer than a World War II destroyer, and the hull itself, it looked wrong. It was too smooth, too streamlined. The ROV's lights caught a strange, dull texture. It wasn't painted steel. It looked almost like it was coated in a thick, black, rubbery material. What the divers had found was a lost relic, a ghost from the very end of the conflict. They had found an undocumented secret-class submarine, a weapon of staggering size and power sealed in its own tomb. But the real shock wasn't the sub itself. It was what was on the sub and the even greater shock of what was inside it. This wasn't just a sub, it was a time capsule of a terrifying alternate future. This ghost ship was an underwater aircraft carrier and it was loaded. The Leviathan class. The submarine floating in the dark wasn't just any submarine. As the ROV traveled the length of the hull, the archaeologists started taking measurements. It was over 400 feet long. This immediately set off alarms. This was the signature of the most ambitious naval project of the entire mid-century conflict, the I-400 class Sen-Toku, or Special Submarine. What most people don't realize is that these weren't just submarines. They were underwater aircraft carriers. This discovery immediately changed the game. Historians knew about the I-400 class. 3 of them were built: the I-400, the I-401, and the I-402. They were by far the largest submarines built during the entire conflict, and they remained the largest submarines in the world until the nuclear-powered carriers of the 1960s, a full 20 years later. So here's the deal with these monsters. The I-4Os were the brainchild of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the same man who planned the Pearl Harbor operation. Yamamoto didn't just want to fight the U.S. Navy in the Pacific. He wanted to take the conflict to the American homeland. He wanted to bomb New York and Washington, D.C. To do that, he needed a weapon that didn't exist. He needed a submarine with a truly global range, one that could carry and launch multiple attack planes. The I-4Os were the result. These Leviathans had a range of 37,500 miles. That's enough to circle the globe 1.5 times without refueling. No other submarine even came close. And get this, the entire forward deck, about 115 feet of it, was a massive watertight cylindrical hangar. Inside that hangar, each submarine carried 3 Aichi M6A Siren float planes. These were specialized attack planes built specifically for the I-400s. They could be armed with a 1,800-pound bomb or a torpedo. The plan was incredible. The submarine would surface, crews would rush onto the deck, and they would roll the planes out of the hangar on a compressed air catapult. They could launch all 3 planes in under 30 minutes. After the mission, the planes would land on the water next to the sub, be hoisted back on board by a crane, and the sub would dive. The Japanese Navy's main plan for these subs was a mission codenamed Operation Arashi. The goal? To sail 2 of these subs, the I-400 and I-401, all the way across the Pacific, surface near the coast of Panama, and launch their 6 planes. Their target was the Gotten Locks of the Panama Canal. Think about that. The Panama Canal was the main artery for the U.S. Navy, letting them move ships from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Taking it out would have been a massive blow. The planes were even painted to look like American aircraft to help them in their sneak attack. This mission was fully planned. The pilots were trained. The subs were ready. They set sail in late July 1945, but they were recalled just a few weeks later when the conflict ended. When Japan surrendered, the U.S. Navy was stunned by these massive subs. They had no idea they existed. The crews of the I-400 and I-401 were ordered to surrender. But here's the catch. The U.S. military immediately classified their existence. They didn't want the Soviets, their new rivals, to find out about this incredible technology. The U.S. Navy took the I-400 and I-401 back to Pearl Harbor to study them. Then, in 1946, when they got word that Soviet scientists were demanding access, the U.S. Navy took both subs out to sea off the coast of Hawaii, shot them with torpedoes, and sank them in deep water. They buried the secret. The I-402 was scuttled separately. So, if the I-400, 401, and 402 are all accounted for, what was this submarine doing in a sealed cave near Hiroshima? Historians only knew of 3 I-4Os being completed, but naval records have long hinted at rumors of more hulls being laid down. The divers in the Kure Cave hadn't found the 400, 401, or 402. They had found the I-406, an undocumented, unknown sister ship. But as the ROV continued to scan the hull, the OMAG team realized this was even more than that. The hull was coated in a thick black anechoic tile, a type of rubberized coating designed to absorb sonar signals. This was a stealth submarine, decades before its time. Even more shocking, the ROV's camera focused on the propellers. They weren't the standard brass screws, they were a bizarre, multi-bladed, scythe-like design. This was technology nobody had seen from that era. This wasn't just an I-400, this was the I-406 Kai, a modified or evolved version. This immediately launched a dozen wild theories. One of the most believable is that the I-406 Kai was a testbed for an experimental engine. German engineers, in the final days of their own conflict, had developed the Walter turbine, a revolutionary engine that ran on high-test peroxide. It allowed their Type 17 subs to hit breathtaking underwater speeds of over 25 knots, fast enough to outrun destroyers. The problem was, it was dangerously unstable. The theory is that the Japanese received this technology from a German U-boat in a secret exchange, and the I-406 Kai was the only ship to ever be fitted with it. This sub wasn't just a carrier, it was a true underwater predator, a UFO of the deep for its time. This advanced sub wasn't built for the Panama Canal. It was built for something worse. Project F-Go. The discovery of a fourth and vastly more advanced I-400 sent a shockwave through the history community. But the ROV's camera was still rolling, and what it found next turned this from an archaeological find into a terrifying what-if. As the ROV Kensei moved along the hull, it focused its lights on the 115-foot-long hangar tube. The divers, watching from the ship above, expected it to be sealed tight. It wasn't. The massive circular door of the hangar was slightly open, just a crack, a few inches wide. After careful planning, the team maneuvered the small ROV to squeeze inside the gap. The tension on the research vessel was unbelievable. They were the first to see inside this place in 80 years. The ROV entered the hangar. It was designed to hold 3 planes, folded up, but the hangar was empty. There were no planes. Instead, the floor of the hangar was lined with racks, and in those racks were dozens of canisters. They were specialized ceramic containers, each about 3 feet tall, sealed with wax and heavy steel clamps. They were stacked everywhere. The RO Verify's sonar estimated there were over 200 of them inside the hangar. One of the canisters had fallen from its rack and broken open on the metal floor. The ROV's camera zoomed in. Inside was a dark, dried paste and what looked like hundreds of small, dried insects. The archaeologists were confused. This wasn't a torpedo. It wasn't a bomb. What was this? They sent the footage to a specialized military historian in Tokyo. The historian's reply came back in 1 hour, and it was chilling. He told them to seal the cave immediately. The divers, he explained, had not found a mission to blow up a canal. They had found the last, desperate, and most terrifying secret project of the entire conflict. They had found the physical evidence of Operation Cherry Blossoms at Night. What most people don't realize is that Operation Cherry Blossoms at Night was a real documented plan. It was conceived by a man named Shiro Ishii. Shiro Ishii was not a naval commander. He was the director of Unit 731. For those who don't know, Unit 731 was a top-secret research and development unit based in Manchuria, and their research was not on planes or subs, it was on people. Unit 731 was responsible for some of the most horrific experiments imaginable. They weren't just soldiers, they were scientists, and they were dedicated to weaponizing the most terrifying sicknesses known to man. They learned how to turn the plague, cholera, and anthrax into weapons. They had perfected the art of raising plague-infected fleas and dropping them from planes in special ceramic bombs, just like the canisters found in the I-406. The plan for Operation Cherry Blossoms at night was simple and demonic. The Japanese Navy would use the I-400 class submarines with their massive range and aircraft hangars to sneak up on the U.S. West Coast. The target was Southern California, San Diego, Los Angeles, San Francisco. The subs would surface at night, launch their Sea-Ran aircraft, but instead of bombs, the planes would be carrying hundreds of pounds of these ceramic canisters. The pilots would fly over the cities and drop their payloads, unleashing millions of plague-infected fleas onto the population. The goal was to cause mass panic and sickness, to incapacitate the American homeland and force a negotiation. The plan was fully approved. The I-400 and I-401 were assigned to the mission. The date was set for September 22, 1945. The only reason it never happened was that the conflict ended on August 15th. The mission was called off just weeks before it was set to launch. Or so the history books said. The discovery of the I-406 Kai proves that the Cherry Blossoms mission was much further along than anyone knew. The I-406 wasn't just assigned to the mission, it was locked and loaded. But the ROV found something else. Past the racks of ceramic bombs at the very back of the hangar was a second bulkhead, a reinforced lead-lined door. The ROV's manipulator arm managed to push it open. Inside was a much smaller compartment, and in it were 3 heavy lead-lined containers known as pigs. The ROV's onboard sensors, which are designed to detect all sorts of things, suddenly lit up. A faint but distinct radiation signature. This is where the story goes from terrifying to apocalyptic. The I-406 wasn't just carrying biological agents, it was also the flagship of a second program, Project F-Go. Project F-Go was the Japanese atomic program. Historians have always dismissed it as a small, underfunded, and ultimately failed effort. But the discovery in this cave suggests that failure was just a cover story. The wild theory, which is now gaining a lot of traction, is that the Japanese never intended to build a full bomb like the Americans. They didn't have the resources. Instead, they were building a dirty bomb. The Japanese military was secretly mining uranium in Konan, Northern Korea, and shipping the refined salts back to Japan. The lead pigs in the I-406 were filled with this radiological material. The full mission becomes clear. It was a 1-2 punch. The I-406 Kai would surface off Los Angeles. The first planes would drop the plague fleas. Then, as the city descended into panic and emergency services were overwhelmed, a second wave of planes would drop the radiological bombs, contaminating a huge part of the city and making it unlivable. It was a true doomsday weapon. The empty hangar, save for the canisters, tells a dark story. The planes were likely on the deck, being prepped for launch when something happened. The cave was near Kure, just a few miles from Hiroshima. The date was early August 1945. The team realized with horror what they were looking at. The I-406 was likely at its final staging point, its planes on deck, just days or even hours away from leaving for California. And then, the world changed. The 1945 event, the massive blast over Hiroshima, would have been catastrophic, even miles away. The shockwave and the resulting chaos likely caused a rock slide, sealing the mouth of the secret cave, with the submarine, its crew, and its horrific cargo still inside. The sub was trapped by one event, but it was buried by another. A concrete tomb. The discovery of the I-406 Kai, loaded with the twin payloads for Operation Cherry Blossoms and Project F-Go, is one of the biggest historical finds of the century. But it also raises a terrifying question. How did this stay secret for 80 years? The sub was trapped in early August 1945. The conflict ended just days later. The Americans arrived and the occupation of Japan began. So here's the deal. The Americans must have found it. The Kure naval base was a primary target for U.S. intelligence. They scoured every inch of that place. It's impossible to think they would miss a giant secret submarine base carved into a mountain. The new documents, declassified in 2025, fill in the blanks. The U.S. did find it. An engineering battalion clearing debris in late 1945 found the sealed cave entrance. When they blasted their way in, they found the same site the divers just saw, a massive I-400 sub floating in a dark lagoon. But the Americans also found the crew, dozens of sailors, trapped by the rock slide, had perished inside. And then they found the cargo. This is where the story gets really dark. The U.S. intelligence officers immediately recognized the ceramic canisters. They knew all about Unit 731. What most people don't realize is one of the biggest and darkest cover-ups of the entire post-conflict period. The Americans, led by General MacArthur, found Shiro Ishii and the leaders of Unit 731. But they didn't put them on trial. Instead, they made a deal. The U.S. government gave Shiro Ishii and his entire team full immunity from prosecution. They were never punished for their horrific actions. In exchange, they had to hand over all of their research, every last file, on biological programs. The U.S. wanted the data for its own programs, and more importantly, they wanted to keep it away from the Soviets. This deal, struck at the Zama complex, was the beginning of the U.S.'s own biological research at places like Fort Detrick. It was a direct transfer of knowledge. The discovery of the I-406, packed with the actual physical payloads, was a massive problem. If the world found out what was in that cave, or that the U.S. was giving immunity to the very people who created it, the scandal would be enormous. But the radiological material, that was even worse. The U.S. had just presented itself as the sole atomic power. To reveal that the Japanese were also on the verge of radiological warfare would muddy the waters. It had to be buried. But here is where the wildest and most disturbing theory comes in. It's called the Pacific Paperclip. Everyone knows about Operation Paperclip, where the U.S. secretly brought over 1,600 German scientists like Wernher von Braun to work on rockets and jets. The new theory is that the U.S. ran a second, even more secret version in Japan. According to this theory, when the U.S. engineers found the I-406 Kai, the crew was not gone. They were alive and they surrendered. The U.S. military, stunned by the advanced stealth hull, the bizarre propellers, and the experimental engine, didn't see a war prize, they saw a technological leap. The theory goes that MacArthur's intelligence unit, the G2, took the entire crew of the I-406, the engineers, the scientists, and the sub's designers, and made them disappear. They were given new identities, just like the Germans, and put to work in secret U.S. bases. The submarine designers were sent to Groton, Connecticut to help design the next generation of U.S. subs. The biological experts were sent to Fort Detrick to work with Shiro Ishii's data. And the radiological experts? They were sent to the new atomic labs. This Pacific Paperclip would explain the sudden, unexplained leaps in U.S. submarine technology in the 1950s. And what about the I-406 Kai? The U.S. Navy couldn't let the Soviets find it, but it was too big to move and too valuable to just sink. So they did the only thing they could. After learning everything they could from it, they put it back in its pen. They recovered the bodies of the original crew who had perished in the initial rock slide, and then they sealed the cave. They didn't just put up a sign. The ROV found residue of modern 1940s-era explosives on the inside of the plug. The U.S. Navy brought in the Seabees, their construction battalions, and poured an 8-foot-thick plug of reinforced concrete, disguising it to look like the natural rock face. They literally wiped it off the map. The I-406, its mission, and its dark cargo were classified at the highest level. The existence of the Pacific Paperclip was denied. For 80 years, the secret held. The 2025 discovery is just the next phase of the cover-up. The final retrieval. This brings us back to 2025. Why declassify this now? Why, after 80 years of total silence, would the U.S. and Japanese governments suddenly release the very documents that would lead divers straight to this terrifying time capsule? It's not that simple, though. They didn't release it for history. They released it out of fear. The island that holds the I-406 is in a geologically active region. Japan is no stranger to earthquakes. In the last few years, geological surveys have shown that the island is becoming unstable. The rock around the secret bunker is fractured. The crazy part is, the two governments realized they had a massive problem. They had an 80-year-old submarine full of 200 canisters of still potentially viable plague and other agents, and leaking radiological material, sitting in a cave that could collapse in the next major earthquake. If that cave collapsed, those ceramic canisters would be crushed, releasing their contents into the sea. It would be an ecological and public health disaster of unimaginable size. They had to go in, but they couldn't just send in the military. It would cause a panic. So here's the deal. The declassification of the files in 2025 was a cover. It was a way to let a private archaeological team, the OMAG, which is almost certainly a government front, discover the cave. The divers thought they were on a mission of history. They were actually on a disposal mission. Their job isn't to raise the sub, it's to safely access and neutralize the 200 canisters from Operation Cherry Blossoms at night and the lead pigs from Project F-Go. But even this real story might be a cover for an even wilder theory. What if the geological instability is just a lie? What if there is another reason to go back in 80 years later? Think about it. Why now? This theory suggests that the I-406 Kai isn't just a historical relic, it's a missing piece. What if that experimental engine, the Walter-type turbine, wasn't the final design? What if the Japanese, in their desperation, were working on something else? What if the radiological material in the back wasn't a dirty bomb, but a power source? This theory claims the I-406 Kai was a test bed for a primitive early-stage atomic reactor, a technology that shouldn't have existed for another 15 years. The U.S. in 1945 couldn't move this reactor. It was too heavy, too dangerous, and maybe they couldn't even understand it. So they sealed it in, classifying it as a radiological hazard, and waited. Now in 2025, the technology is finally caught up. The declassification isn't a disposal mission, it's a retrieval mission. The OMAG team isn't there to clean up a mess. They are there to recover the lost prototype power source. They are there to bring back a piece of technology that has been sitting in the dark for 80 years, a piece of tech that could, once again, change the world. So this is where we have to talk down to earth. What's the real story? Are we missing a key detail? The thing is, we have three narratives. First, the official story. A private team just found a lost World War II submarine. This is the story you'll see on the 9 o'clock news. Second, the leaked story. A secret government team is cleaning up a dangerous mess of old biological and radiological agents before an earthquake breaks the cave. This is the story the intelligence agencies want people to believe. And third, the real theory. This is a high-tech Black Ops retrieval. The US and Japan are recovering a piece of lost technology, a prototype engine or reactor that they buried 80 years ago. The I-406 Kai is a symbol. It's a ghost of a war that almost happened, a war of plagues and dirty bombs. Its discovery proves the immunity deal, the Pacific Paperclip, and the terrifying lengths the Japanese military was willing to go to, and the lengths the US went to cover it all up. Do you believe the official story? Or is this a modern retrieval mission for lost technology? Let us know in the comments. Make sure to like and subscribe for more incredible stories just like this.